Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's Orbit Live event with science fiction authors Laura Lamb and KB Wagers. Laura Lamb is the author of Goldilocks, out this month in paperback from Orbit, as well as the recent Seven Devils with Elizabeth May and other novels. KB Wagers is the author of the Indranan War, did I say that right, Katie? And Farian War trilogies. Out Past the Stars, the final book in the Farian War trilogy, is out this month from Orbit as well. They are also the author of the Neo-G science fiction series. At the bottom of the screen, you'll find a link to buy copies of Goldilocks and Out Past the Stars. The authors will be talking about their books, Women in Space, and Imagining an Inclusive Future. Plus, they'll be answering your questions. Click on the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen to add one to the list, or to vote on the questions that have already been submitted by other attendees. We'll answer questions with the most votes first. Don't forget to follow Orbit on Crowdcast if you'd like to be notified about future Orbit Live events. Next month, we'll be welcoming fantasy authors C.L. Clarke and Tasha Suri to the virtual stage. And now I'm pleased to turn things over to Laura Lamb and KB Wagers.
Thanks, Ellen. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. Hello from very dark Edinburgh.
So we appreciate you all taking the time to come and see us, and hear us, I guess, and ask us questions. As Ellen said, there is an Ask a Question button in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, I believe. Make sure you ask questions in that section and not in the general chat. You can say anything appropriate in the general chat. Please behave yourselves. And we will get this underway. Just to expand on Ellen's introduction, Elle over there is also known as Laura Lamb, grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area and moved to Scotland in 2009 after a long-distance relationship with somebody that they met on the internet, which I can also claim. We have that in common, yeah. They also claim to have no practical skills, which I'm not sure I believe that.
I'm very good at lying and helping other people lie better.
That's very practical.
Yeah. And then KB grew up on a farm in northeastern Colorado and perhaps has too many plants. You can see a small selection behind them. And loves fashion, but perpetually dresses in jeans and hoodies because life is stressful, especially now. And has now written 7 books in 4 years, which is redonkulous. And obviously, Out Past the Stars is going to come out soon, which stars Hale, who is a gunrunner turned various different jobs over the books. And you should check out if you haven't already. Cool. So where should we start?
Excellent. Well, we can start with what is the first thing you're going to do after the quarantine restrictions are lifted? Since I'm sure that's a question that everybody is thinking about.
When they're properly lifted. I'm probably, if I can, I'm going to try to fly back to San Francisco to see my mom because she was meant to fly out for both of my book launches last year and obviously couldn't do either of them. And I miss my mama, so that would be great to see her and get a hug. What about you?
For sure. Yeah. I don't even know, to be honest. It's been a very weird year for me because I've still been going to work every day out in the wild world. But definitely go see people, I think is the big, just to be able to go and hang out and see people is such a thing that I miss and did not ever think that I would super miss that being an introvert, but
yeah. I've learned my introversion has limits. But yeah.
Oh.
And then as another kind of fun one, do you have a favorite song or album you've been listening to lately, maybe while you're writing?
Oh shoot. I should have looked this up before
You put that question.
I know, I'm the one who asked the question. And look where we are. Look what that's done. I'm pulling up my my Amazon. Yeah, Pistols at Dawn by Cinebuse has been on very heavy rotation, which is one of my favorites. And I've been sharing a lot of things from the various playlists. I make playlists for like the different books that I'm working
cool.
on. So I would say also Gravity by Sarah Bareilles has been another one that has been on heavy rotation. So what about you?
I've been listening to a lot of Enya. I don't know why, but for some reason, Enya is my Pavlovian response to try and write my fantasy book. I'm trying to, machete my way through the first draft. And so I put it on, and Orinoco Flow comes up first, and I'm like, all right, time to get to business. And I used to be like so dismissive of Enya when I was like 12, but I'm like, no, her music is really good. She slaps.
Yeah. And that I like that style of music for writing. I can write to lyric music because I tune it out most of the time. I have a weird aversion to writing to soundtracks because then the other people's story is already in my head and I can't, get through it. And that reminds me, I've been listening to a lot of Ward Runa right now too, because I went looking for like Viking music after I got done playing Valhalla.
Nice.
And so that's been on pretty heavy rotation too, which is awesome.
Cool.
Ah, man. So yeah, sliding over into the writing related stuff. We were talking earlier about like flirting with science fiction and fantasy and where that where that one bleeds into the other, because we both have books, right, that are kind of writing that line between fantasy and reality. Yours more with Seven Devils. Goldilocks is much more like a little more science. Yeah, a little more like The Martian, a little more science-based, and phenomenal for those of you who have not read it.
Thank you.
But what do you think about that? Like, where is the fun? What's the fun? What's the challenge of writing that line between fantasy and science fiction?
Yeah, I think it's like if you're doing science fantasy, you have to know like where is it that it tips too far over and that you might alienate people who have picked up a sci-fi novel and are expecting some element of sci-fi if it's just straight up almost fantasy in space versus not. But like I think too, it just depends on the aesthetics. Like your books are sort of in the middle between Goldilocks and Seven Devils, and that we have a lot more like recognizable place names and countries and things like that. And you can kind of see the line more. Whereas Seven Devils is like 4,000 or 5,000 years in the future, and they've forgotten most of what happened in Earth. For some reason, they've remembered a bunch of Roman and Greek names, but not much else. But I like the freedom to not have to make things up quite so intensely that in Seven Devils compared to having to like Google everything for Goldilocks and at least make it sound plausible. Whereas with Seven Devils, I was like, there are laser bullets on page 1, and I don't know how they work, and I don't care. They are laser bullets.
You're just going to roll with it because laser bullets are cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I call that the Dinglehopper Effect often, with the idea that you have to make up everything, and sometimes it can really be detrimental to the book that you're working on, because just call it a fork. Like, even though we're 5,000 years in the future, I feel like people are going to know that it's a fork. You don't have to make up a new name for it. It will be okay.
Yeah, on the Masters, we call that "Don't call a rabbit a smurp," which I think is from the Turkey City Lexicon. Because if it has 2 ears and it hops around and it has whiskers and it twitches its nose, it's a rabbit.
It's a rabbit. Yeah, and I like that too, especially if you're dealing with a world that is like Earth originated. You haven't made up a completely new universe where there's no mention of Earth, where Earth never existed, that type of thing. But the idea that even as humans, once we go out into space, we will take a great deal of that with us. And we look at things like
My husband dropped a pan.
It's all right, folks. We're all under control.
It's all good.
Where we are going into space and we take things with us, right? And even, you look at now, we still talk about Homer, we still talk about the Odyssey, we still talk about, Vikings, we still talk about stuff that happens a long time ago. It hasn't just disappeared. And so, it is like, it's really important to stick with that sort of thing. So,
yeah. So kind of on a related note, like what's some of the really interesting research or rabbit holes you've fallen down into while writing your books? And yeah, when like if research fails you, are you like, yeah, it's all good?
Well, for the Hale books, one of the most fascinating things that I ended up researching was how to poison somebody without like killing them right away.
Nice.
Which, for those who have read the book, know what I'm talking about. And then on top of that, figuring out how to like transfer a fungus, essentially, which is what there's a deadly fungus on Earth called the Destroying Angel, which is a mushroom. Oddly tangentially, while I was running around in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, they have that mushroom. Should not eat that mushroom; it will kill you. And the like trying to figure out like what symptoms you can pull, and then how, if you grow something on another planet, what is it going to do to it? Like, how is it going to change it? Which is sort of the fun, like, I'm just going to play with this, and turn it into something new. And then there's I always fall into kind of weird things that don't necessarily mean anything in the story itself, but get really fascinating to me and have like a one-line impact somewhere. Like trying to research how far stars are from planets and how that would impact like the elliptical, and how it would impact on if you have a binary star system, where you're going to have like where this planet's going to be at a certain time versus where this planet's going to be at a certain time, so that I could write like one comment somewhere in a book that's like,
one throwaway sentence that people will not spend much time on.
Nobody notices it, it's fine,
yeah.
But I know it's in there, which is the whole point.
Yeah, I think I learned a lot about algae, and I have like this newfound respect for algae and how it's going to save us all. And I was lucky enough to really late in the process actually realize that one of my good friends is basically my main character, except not an astronaut, because she's an evolutionary biologist at the University of Edinburgh and runs a lab where she runs evolution experiments for the acidification of oceans and other stuff. She's doing something with epigenetics that I don't understand. She's very brilliant. And so she read all of the relevant algae bits and changed them for me and helped make sure it made sense, and also told me how I could make the little jelly cubes that they all eat on the ship taste like cinnamon or vanilla chemically, which was cool. So yeah, I don't know if I'd actually want to eat those, but I now theoretically know how I could make them taste slightly better.
It should be a good thing. And that's, I think about surviving in space a lot, and have done a ton of research and tried to figure out. And that was, in the Neo G novels, in the first one, A Pale Light in the Black, the algae actually fits into the story also, and figuring out how humans are going to survive radiation out in space, and the protections that we need for that. So that was a fascinating rabbit hole to dump into. But it's always fun to kind of email friends or call friends and be like, hey, can you answer this question for me?
Yeah, I love having friends who are way more clever than I am. They can make me sound clever. It's great.
Yeah. Or they don't mind.
Shall we start going to the questions? Because we've got 10, which is awesome.
We can. Oh, hey, they bounced up while we weren't paying attention. Yeah. Well, the one at the top is the one that everybody wants to know, which is, how did you react to the Mars rover landing?
Yeah. I was very excited.
I was also. I was possibly crying. For anybody who follows me on Twitter, I was yelling at customers because I was stuck at work. And people kept coming in while I was trying to watch the landing. I was literally, then my boss was like, hey, will you call this guy? And I was like, I am in the middle of trying to watch a robot land on Mars. And my boss knows me well enough. He's like, oh, okay, never mind. I'll go do it.
I was really lucky because I forget what I was doing. And then I checked Twitter and it was 5 minutes before it landed. So I didn't have to do a very long build up, but it was very exciting to watch and to see everyone in the JPL go yay. Yeah. Always a good moment.
Yeah. Well, and we're just so it's such a fascinating thing. And I'm always in awe of the amount of work that gets done behind the scenes, the amount of precision and technical calculation that requires, that is required to essentially throw a chunk of metal off of this spinning rock,
yeah,
and throw it at another spinning rock a long way away, and have it land within 35 meters of where they wanted it to be.
Yeah,
like I can't throw something across the room and hit what I'm trying to hit. So
it's this sort of stuff that, like, I guess gives me hope for the future, because if we can have people cooperate enough to do that, like if we all put our minds to it, and we've seen too, like cooperation resulted in the vaccine being developed so quickly too. So it does give me hope that human ingenuity might help us avoid our certain catastrophe.
Right. And we, and they mentioned that this was truly a global effort because they had several either satellites or stations around Earth, so that as we were rotating, they weren't ever losing contact, and they were always able to do it. You know what? That segues into a question that I just thought of, which is both of us had books come out last year, early in the year, right at the pandemic start. And both of our books involve basically the collapse of human society.
Yeah.
So how'd that feel, Elle?
It was really, really weird because a lot of the stuff, I wrote most of the book in 2019. It was my shortest deadline and the quickest I'd ever written a book. And I had people wearing masks outside, but due to air quality, and that was inspired by seeing a picture of my mom in the mask because of the California wildfires. And it gave me this really strange feeling to see that picture of her in the mask. And now it's like, well, pictures of people wearing masks is very, very normal these days. I had a pandemic in the book, which I don't mind spoiling people for so that they know it's there. And it largely bypasses children. And all these other, all the rollback of the rights of women and the reproductive rights, we're seeing they're still trying to do the 6-week abortion ban. It's just really, really scary. And I'll kind of roll my eyes when people say I don't think it's believable that women's rights would, go back that much in 10 years. And I'm like, is it though? Is it? So yeah, and it was a shame that especially here in the UK, both the hardback and the paperback came out during lockdown. So I don't really know what effect that had on the book for discoverability, which is a real shame, but there's not really anything I can do about it. So I just have to hope that word of mouth kind of helps it keep ticking along.
Yeah.
What about you?
About the same. I kept finding myself shouting at the computer at random points, stop making my fantasies a reality. This is supposed to be fiction. Because that the A Pale Light in the Black, the universe that it's set in is a near future, about 25th century, but it is very much a world that is born of what I call the collapse, which is about 100 years starting in 2016, where shit just goes downhill and the same thing. I had a pandemic that went out of control, and it's all very Black Death type of thing, in that most of the characters involved, it's been several hundred years since it happened, and so nobody really thinks about it anymore except as this thing that happened. Except for, of course, Jinx, who is super obsessed and talks about it a lot. So
So there's a great question about how both our books are about writing or women taking proactive roles in space. Why was it important for you to tell these stories? And that's from Anju.
They so often say you write the books that you want to read, I think. And that's for me, growing up, reading books that were always largely either by, for, or about men, specifically cis men, it never, I don't know, it's one of those things where it's so sunken into your psyche that you don't notice there's a problem until you notice there's a problem.
Yeah.
And then once you notice there's a problem, you can't stop thinking about it. And so having read so many books and watched so many shows and everything, when I started writing my own stuff, it was always very focused on like women as the actors. And then as the years kind of went on, like my focus has become a lot more, you know, that like trans women being involved or non-binary people being involved. And so it's just, it's an important thing to see yourself represented in media, I think is what it boils down to.
Yeah, definitely. Like Star Wars, like Seven Devils, the purpose behind it really was to write like Star Wars for gay women, basically, where we're front and center and get to have fun and, you know, have pew pew lasers and be in charge of saving the galaxy. And I really wanted to play with those tropes, but put like women and a trans woman like front and center. And then with Goldilocks too, like I love astronaut films, but like most of them, aside from like Gravity, there aren't really women on it, or even if they are, they're really in the background, not like the key players. Like, for example, The Martian has good female characters, but they're, you know, in the background. And poor Liv Tyler, she had to play the astronaut's wife left back on Earth twice in 2 different films. I'm like, send Liv Tyler to space. She can go to space. And it's frustrating too, because like the history of spaceflight has a lot of women at the heart of it, and has a lot of, you know, Black women in particular, as we saw with the Hidden Figures. The book really kind of came into focus for me when I researched the Mercury 13, who I hadn't heard of, but they did all the same tests as the Mercury 7, and in some cases tested better than the men. They were considered more mentally resilient. But they weren't allowed to go to space because they were women. And like a woman was jealous of them and like threw them all under the bus and testified in Congress being like, no, women are too flighty to be in space. It's the whole thing. I named the evil president after her. Cochrane.
Excellent. I love being petty in text in ways that you don't really explain to people. But you know, again, you know it's there. There might be a select couple of people who know too, but yeah.
Do you want to choose another question, KB?
Yeah, I was looking at this one. So EB asked us, both of your books are largely set on spaceships. How did such a constrained setting affect the stories you were telling? And what kind of research did you do about life on a spaceship? You know, I feel like I got the better end of the deal here. The Hale books, they kind of bounce back and forth. She's mostly on planet in the first book. And the one thing I can say about that is there's a very deliberate sense of claustrophobia, sense of being trapped and constrained in the palace that Hale feels, and that I wanted, by extension, the reader to feel while they were reading it. And it was funny because I had a conversation with my UK editor kind of early on, where she was like, she doesn't go outside, like she doesn't go anywhere else. And I'm like, yeah, I know, like that's on purpose, and she's not happy about it. And there was, and so just this idea of somebody who had got to spend a good chunk of her life, 20 years of her life, on a spaceship, doing her own thing, making her own rules for the most part, you know, even when she was flying with Hal, she was making her own rules. And then suddenly is supposedly the most powerful person on the planet, and yet is stuck here, and does not get to go anywhere. And then, well, I'll let you go ahead, and I'll think about like life on an interceptor ship for the Neo G.
Yeah. So I like, because it's a tense thriller for Goldilocks, like the setting really helped give that sense of claustrophobia, and you know, you literally cannot escape because you are surrounded by the void of space. So if the problem is coming from inside the ship, you are screwed. And I thought that was a really interesting thing to play with. And I did a lot of research. Like I listened to pretty much every NASA podcast out there. Houston, We Have a Podcast is a particularly good one. So I learned a lot about like what it means to be on a ship. I read every astronaut memoir that I could get my hands on. And my favorite one is Chris Hadfield's An Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth. It's just so nice. He's just like the sweetest Canadian dad telling you everything's going to be okay. And I love it so much. Listen to it on audiobook.
Stuff will kill you.
Yeah, a lot of stuff will kill you. He does narrate it, so you just get like nice Canadian dad reading to you for hours. It's delightful. I re-listen to it once a year now because it also has really good like advice for writing. Weirdly, trying to be a successful writer is a lot like trying to be an astronaut, except you need no practical skills. So that's why I'm here.
Yeah, I loved it. I loved it. So I just read it. It's been on my bookshelf for months and months, and I just read it at the end of last year, and then consequently spent like 3 days on Twitter raving about it.
So good. I love it. But yeah, and Seven Devils, like they did at least get to pop off on different planets. So it's not as claustrophobic, and that ship is much bigger. You can fit like 100 people on that ship, whereas there's only room for like 5 or 6 people on the Goldilocks Atalanta. So yeah, lots of research, but really interesting. And I don't think I would cope very well in space. Be a shit astronaut.
Yeah, I'm like, I love the idea of space. I do not like the practical reality of space all that much.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, it is not. For the Neo-G, I spent a lot of time looking at Coast Guard living facilities and naval facilities, and they are still able, there's a lot of kind of bouncing back and forth. We spend some time on Jupiter Station, we spend some time on Earth. But it was kind of the same thing as you, like just looking at how people live in those quarters and how you learn to interact with people when you are kind of confined in this. And, you know, the interceptor crew of Zuma's Ghost obviously works together, lives together. They all know each other real well, although in the first book they have a sudden personnel change that causes things to go kind of sideways. And so in that case, it's more people learning to live together and some of the problems that you can have.
So for the next one, I'll do one that's just for you, Katie, which is you are 6 books deep into the Hale series. When you started, did you have that entire series mapped out in your head? That answers that, all 6 books. Or did you make that up as you went along?
We make shit up in this house, folks.
There are vague plans, maybe, now and again.
I like actually literally no plans for the Fairy and War. We, as we mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, I have written 7 books in 4 years, and I have blacked out for a good chunk of it. There was such a rush to write the Andronin War. Obviously, I got to spend like 6 years or something on Behind the Throne. And then, you know, the next 2 books got written in like 3 months a piece. And
oh God.
That was it.
That gives me hives.
And I still, there are times when I'm like, oh man, a lot of people love After the Crown. After the Crown's one that I'm kind of like, oh man, we left a lot of stuff on the table because of the timing, and I really was just sort of writing by the seat of my pants a good chunk of the time. Some stuff does get planned out, and I can say after the stars, what is that? Out Past the Stars, was planned out better than most of the books. I spent a good chunk of 2019 kind of sitting on it and trying to figure out what was going to happen. I mean, it was a big deal because it's the end of the series. It's the end of the trilogy. At least at the moment, it's the end of Hale's story. And I didn't want to screw it up. So I spent a lot of time kind of reading the previous books, figuring out where I wanted to go, figuring out stuff that had been mentioned. There's a lot of, for me, I love that cyclical thing where you get these echoes of stuff that happens at the beginning of the series and at the beginning of other books, back as we return to the end of it. So I did not, in fact, have that entire series mapped out in my head. It was just, we did a lot of, and in fact, the the reveal at the end of Beyond the Empire, which is the last book in the Andronin War trilogy, came about because I was desperately trying to figure out what was going on and reading back through some of the books, and found a moment where Hale's cleaning out her father's study and was like, that's it.
Thank you.
I have figured out what's going on, and here
Thanks,
we go.
past self.
Yeah, like, nice job. Oh, yeah. So, let's see. What else do we have? Well, since we
choose one.
choose. Since let's take this one from EB again. Since you talked about music earlier, what kind of music do your characters listen to? And do people still listen to music for fun in the future?
That's a good question. I do have that Ariadne in Seven Devils loves to listen to music, and she grew up very like sheltered. She's like the super hacker of the group, and she was raised by like the AI who controls a lot of people's minds in the Thalassian Empire, which isn't a super spoiler. You find that out in the first chapter. And so she's grown up very alone, and she loves music, especially old world music, which is basically Earth. And they have like a dance party in Seven Devils, which was great. And then I do mention briefly that on Goldilocks, they were able to take like a bunch of ebooks and a bunch of music and stuff, but I don't really go into the details of what they listened to. Probably should have. That would have helped add ambiance, I suppose.
Yeah. I don't talk about music that I can recall in the Hale books. For the Neo G books, Jenks definitely listens to music. There's a couple of scenes where, especially like pre-fight type of stuff, where she's got the music on her DD in her head, cranked up and just kind of ignoring the outside world. And in that case, there's like, you can imagine she's listening to like Busta Rhymes or like Dessa or somebody suitably loud and angry. Yeah. So, and again, like people are going to listen to music for fun in the future. Human beings will evolve and we will go out into space, but we are never going to let go of art. We're never going to let go. Art. We're never going to let go of that stuff.
Yeah, which is great. Let's go down to the next one. What favorite tattoo you're willing to share, and any you've got for books you've written? I'll have to like take off my jacket for mine.
And on the Orbit Live, we're now taking our clothes off.
So this is my newest one, which is Space. And it's like watercolor galaxy. And then I got 7 stars, which you can kind of see. It's like a rainbow. And that's for my 7 books that are out so far. And then this little guy is a Hedera, which you use to like separate blocks of text or at the beginning or end of like medieval text. So I got that in like 2014 or something, 2016. And then I also have a waterflower rose with a bee.
Oh.
So, and then I have one on my upper back, but I can't show you that one without stripping, and I'm not going to strip. Sorry.
Like, not that kind of show. Oh my gosh! So I have a metric crap ton. However, I was like, what arm is this? It's my right arm. My right arm is what I call my book arm. And this is an original tattoo for a book that has never been published, which was about an order of knights called the Knights of the White Rose. We have the Andronin Star, which I got shortly after, I want to say shortly after I sold the books, or maybe shortly after Behind the Throne was published. And then my most recent one, and possibly my favorite, at least my current favorite, is Pluto.
Oh, cool.
Pluto, which I actually got done the beginning of March of last year, like 2 days before A Pale Light in the Black was released. And, 2 days before the world started to go sideways. And yeah, I love that tattoo quite a bit. So much so that I, for the upcoming Neo G novel, Holdfast through the fire, I wrote it in so that Max and Jenks got matching Pluto tattoos.
Oh, cute.
Because Jenks is a Pluto stan, and it just seemed like one of the cutest things to do. So
Pluto is a planet again, right? It's been like promoted back to planet.
I think
or dwarf
technically,
planet.
yeah, I think technically it's a dwarf planet now, but we just, yeah, like it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Oh, tattoos. All right, let me see. Where are we? I love how these. Oh, here we have one for you.
Okay.
Elle, who was your favorite character to write in Goldilocks and why?
Oh, that's a good question. I think, like, obviously Naomi is the protagonist, so I was in her head the most. So I really had to figure out what made her tick. And she's quite, like, introspective and meditative, and there's probably a lot of me in her, like the desire to succeed and being really hard on yourself. But Valerie Black was also just so damn fun to write because she's like Sigourney Weaver meets Elon Musk. And I still, like, really like her, even though she's horrible. In some respects, and she's, a hard taskmaster, but she was just really fascinating. I love writing like complicated female characters, so that was fun. But yeah, good question.
Yeah, I like writing characters who don't necessarily always take like the road that they should, but I don't know, that always leans into like, yeah, do the ends justify the means territory?
Yeah, you can see at least where they got there. And my hope was that, like, you could see her logic and kind of be like, she might be right though, and then feel quite like guilty that you thought that. So I can't say too much more because spoilers, but yeah, she's an interesting one. I would love to write like a book from her point of view, like as a strand or something. If I ever wrote a sequel, it'd be cool.
Yeah. Which is always fun to think about.
Mm-hmm. I can dream. Here's a good one. Katie, you write some pretty kick-ass fight scenes. How/where did you learn to do that? My brain, my imagination.
I know. I'm like, well, I have professional training. I spent about 12 years doing Shaolin Kung Fu. And although I'm like 10 years out of it, I technically have a 2nd-degree black belt, which in theory means I could maybe kick your ass, but circumstances being what they are, it's entirely possible that it wouldn't happen. I apparently have a good spatial awareness and a good talent for figuring out like what is important in the fight scenes. And I think one of the things that often trips up new writers is that they are so focused in much the same way that new fighters are too focused on like this and not everything else that's going on. New writers are often too focused on telling the readers what is happening. Who's being, who's punching what, how is this move working, all of that stuff. And being aware of everything else that's going on around you, including how the participants in the fight are feeling, what the terrain looks like, what's the outcome, like what is the end goal of the fight, right? Do you actually want to kill this person? Do you just want to hurt them? Are you really trying not to hurt them? Which is an entirely different skill set. Like people who are very good fighters can put you down without ever hurting you. Yes, as Dawn mentions in the chat, I also had somebody who was very willing when I walked into their office and said, "Hey, do you have a second?" And then, would let me like hit them a couple of times to figure out like where, like I need to know what this does. Like if I hit you like where does your head go? Like, will I then be able to follow up with the second hit? That type of thing. No partners were hurt in the making of any of my books, though. I think we did break a plant one time, though. Oops.
I do like a whole mini lecture on because my day job is teaching on the Creative Masters, and so I do a whole mini lecture on how fight scenes and sex scenes are actually pretty similar. because it's less about like what bit goes where and more about like the emotion and what it reveals about the character and what it conceals about a character when they're put under that like pressure.
Yeah, very much the difference between how you're going to react. But overall I really love writing them, and I love like randomly coming up with like how the scenarios are going to work, where the various fight scenes are going to fit into the story. My favorite story about A Pale Light in the Black is I was driving to work in the dark. It was like 6:30 in the morning. And all of a sudden I'm listening to like playlist for the book, and it stopped playing and kicked in the randoms. Like, you finished your playlist, we're going to start playing something. And it played Daughtry's Undefeated. And all of a sudden my brain was like, hey, you know what happens in that final fight for Jenks when she's fighting the Navy ringer? Like, here's how this fight goes down.
Nice.
So I'm sitting at a light, like all of a sudden just like,
where's my notebook?
Like just punching the air. Like, thank God I was like 2 minutes from work. And I'm sure all the people in the cars around me were like, what is wrong with this person? But
too much emotion for 6:30 in the morning.
Yeah, I know. Like, this is awesome. So yeah. Well, and you like, oh man, some of those fight scenes in Seven Devils.
Which that's mostly Elizabeth. Mostly Elizabeth. I'm going to be honest.
You're like, I'm not even taking credit for that. That's Elizabeth writing those.
Yeah. Yeah, she's really good at them. So I've learned a lot from her by because we edit over each other so much that I guess a couple sentences of the fight scenes are mine. But yeah, she's good at them. Like one of my favorite scenes is one between Eris and Nyx, where Eris is beating the shit out of Nyx to try and convince her to join their cause. Because they're both soldiers, and so Eris understands that violence is the language that Nyx understands, and showing dominance and that sort of thing, and getting it out of her system so then they can talk about what they need to do afterwards.
Oh, yeah.
Let's see, what do we have next?
Thanks for showing up, Ford.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so when writing really far future stories, did you end up reevaluating your expectations of how humans would be? Like things that were too quote unquote now?
There was some stuff that I just decided wasn't going to happen. And this was, somebody asked on Twitter the other day, for writers, if there were, homophobia and transphobia in the worlds that they wrote about. And my response was that, maybe there was, but I didn't feel like it was a story that needed to be told. That it wasn't something I was interested in talking about or giving any kind of airtime to. And I think overall, I always feel generally relatively hopeful about humanity and how we're going to. That was a Garrus tale, by the way.
Is that a cat?
But it's yeah, Garrus just stealth bombed across the screen and then settled onto the deck. That I always feel generally pretty hopeful that humanity is going to figure our shit out, and that we will learn to treat each other at least the majority of us. I think there's always going to be a percentage that are not interested in doing things nice or kind or any of that. But the majority of us will figure out that it's fine, that you can treat people with respect and that you can do things that don't hurt other people deliberately. And so, yeah, I would say that I didn't often have to reevaluate expectations. I just kind of wrote the world that I wanted to see in the first place, and that I feel by and large is a world that already exists.
I think both of mine were cautionary tales, because Goldilocks is you better safeguard your rights or they can really easily slide back without you even noticing. And it was really hard to think about what are sneaky ways that would result in women's rights being rolled back and reproductive rights. And so one of the methods I came up with was well, I don't think they would entirely ban abortion because population control is going to be a consideration if like the world is dying. But if you want to still use reproductive rights as a way to get people who give birth out of the workplace, you make it mandatory that they have to give birth to their first child if they get pregnant. Like, that's it. You give them a birth bonus so that they quit their job for 5 years. And most people can't afford to not take it. And then when you try to go back into the workplace, you've got a 5-year gap and you're not allowed to. And by that point, they put in an IUD or something like that. And you have to pay a bunch of money to have further kids. And so then large families become a status symbol for the rich, basically. And I was quite pleased, well, not pleased, but I was happy with that kind of fix as to how I think that government would try to sneakily use it. Like, it's not as outright obvious as Handmaid's Tale. It's a bit more like insidious, which is, I think, how it would work in our real world. Yeah. And then Seven Devils is just full on fascist, horrible, like colonial empire of doom. So there's all the stuff I hope doesn't happen in the future.
Right, which is always one of those things that comes up, like where, if we're, and you touch on it a little bit in Goldilocks, like if you're on a ship going to another planet to colonize it, who's in charge? And how do you, like, the constant discussion that I see come up is that, like, why are we still writing monarchies in space? Why are we still writing, systems of government that are antiquated or unfair or just flat out don't work in space? And my question is always, like, when you end up in a situation where survival is on the line, like, is a democracy still one of the best decisions there? Or do you have to default to, like, one person making the decision for everybody? I'm the captain of the ship. I'm the one who says, like, we're not going to vote on this type of scenario, which is terrifying on the one hand, but also relatively practical.
Yeah, and I think, like, the way we talk about space exploration is still, like, super colonial. Even if we're going to planets that have no, like, life, aside from maybe some microbial life, you still have to consider that whenever a human, like, sets foot on Mars is going to be fundamentally changed by that a little bit, because, like, you don't always necessarily know how the bacteria in your own skin is going to react with things. This was something Naomi had to worry about, like, if they did get to Cavendish and they were going to start growing the food, like, what if corn is a super invasive species on Cavendish? That's going to be a problem. What if, they make the planet sick somehow because of all the stuff that's in their body? You know, we're full of all sorts of gross stuff, and who even knows what will happen. So I think it's really interesting because I spoke to a planetary scientist who looks at Mars, and he went on a big old rant one time about how, like, Mars isn't actually red and it's all these other colors and things like that. But he said, like, you know, why do we have to change it? Isn't it beautiful the way it is? Like, you know, we can just leave stuff alone, and maybe that's better for a lot of things.
Yeah, balancing that desire to explore and find new things and weighing it against the impact and the harm that we potentially will cause is always something that I know I think about. It sounds like you do too when you're writing.
Yeah, loads.
So, yeah. All right. Well, we got about 10 more minutes.
Yeah,
so,
we got some time for some more.
Let's see. Hey, speaking of poisoning, if you were on trial for murder, what would be the most incriminating Google search or tweet you've made that the prosecution would bring in as evidence?
I Googled the best way to slit a throat, which is actually to stab in the carotid artery, because then it's less blood and they can't scream. So probably that, if someone was murdered in that fashion.
I was going to say, the prosecution would have nothing, because if I were going to kill someone, I would not Google it.
Yeah.
God, I'm trying to think. You know, I don't even know if I have anything good, because so much of my stuff was actually legitimately not Googled. Like, I would actually just call friends up or I had a big conversation about whether or not you could kill somebody with a wine glass. But that happened in my basement. So I went down to see my roommate and was like, hey, I have a question for you.
So can you kill someone with a wine glass?
Yes, you can, in fact, kill somebody with a wine glass.
That makes sense. You just like smash off the top bit and use it as a shiv.
Basically, yeah.
This is how my brain works. I had to Google, it wasn't really like how to kill someone, but I was having such a hard time figuring out what would happen if a mirror gets really hot, because I wanted a visual of like, I have a dragon who throws a hissy fit basically, and I wanted him to like melt a mirror so it would like start like dripping down the wall. And it turns out if it's raised, like if it's heated pretty evenly and not too fast, I can have that. So, but I had to ask Twitter. I was like, science Twitter, please answer this for me. I can't find it on Google.
I know oftentimes Google fails and does not give you the answers that you want. So Twitter is handy.
Really handy.
Thing. Yeah. I have gone on vents where I'm sure I spent like 2 days Googling radioactive fallout. And like where, like how far, if a nuclear plant in New Mexico blew, how far would the damage go, and how long would it last, and random stuff like that, where I'm sure like the NSA guy who lives in my computer was like, Katie, are you okay? Do we need to have a conversation? So, Daniel wants to know if we've ever thought of collaborating with somebody or with each other.
Well, I have written a whole book with Elizabeth May, which I can't reach. It's over there. there it is. I couldn't get the angle to work. And collaborating is a really interesting experience because, like, you can't be too precious because it could be that the other person just writes over you. And you have to figure out how to make your voices blend, which can be a challenge, but it's really fun. So, yeah, I think I'd be open to collaborating again in the future because writing's so lonely that it's nice to do it with someone. And especially with Elizabeth, I write in the daytime and she writes late at night. So it's like literally you wake up and the writing elves have visited and written a chapter and you're like, yes, thank you, Elizabeth. I don't have to do that one.
Plus, in theory, it's like half the work.
Theoretically, but honestly, it feels like we're both just writing full books, especially because they end up long. Like Seven Devils is like almost 140K and Seven Devils 2 is going to be at least 150, I imagine, by the time we're done. So
excellent. I can't wait.
Lots of stuff happens. I'm very excited.
I was so excited. That book got me from the very first like line where they talk about breaking somebody's finger. And I was like, I'm in. Let's go.
And it started with slitting a throat. She didn't do it the tidy way. She did it the messy way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Send a message.
Absolutely. Yeah. You want them to know that you were there.
Yeah. So do you think you will write about Hale's 20 years passed out in the black?
I don't know. I don't have an answer for that question. I love Hale. I loved writing her. I am not sure that I want to write about a 19-year-old Hale for a number of reasons. And yeah, it may be that it's time to move on. I mean, we know, like at the moment at least, we don't have anything planned for Hale. So, that's just kind of where it is. I've got several new ideas. I've spent 10 years of my life working on this world. And I do have some other stuff that I want to write, and I am enjoying the stuff that I'm working on now. So yeah, like I know it's one of those things where you're never sure if you really want to completely say goodbye, but at least for now, we're kind of done.
Yeah, I think prequel trilogies can be tricky too, because like obviously the reader knows how the story ends, so it can be hard to keep up like the tension, I find.
Yeah. Yeah. And we may. I mean, there's always like, if I ever figure out how to actually write a like short story or novella, which sorry, like is not my thing, folks. So I can't promise you anything. But there are an infinite number of like little stories that could be told that are much more,
side quests.
Yeah, basically fun stuff, interesting things. All the times that she got house shot, like that's always good.
So why don't we do some of the wrap-up questions?
Right. Yeah.
So what projects are next on the horizon for you that you feel comfortable sharing?
I'm like in that grand tradition of publishing. I can't talk about any of the projects that I have going.
Not really. No.
Yeah, like hopefully soon, like someday soon. But we got some cool stuff coming. I can say that much. And I can say, like, for folks who are curious about the Hale TV show, we haven't had any recent movement, but we're like still shopping it out. I did get to like read a pilot episode, which was very exciting, and made me cry. Which is always funny. You're like, I know this story, I know how this goes, but here I am, like sobbing like a baby because it's awesome. And so yeah, we'll like just keep your fingers crossed. Hopefully that'll be fun. So, what about you?
I can kind of vaguely point at things. I'm working on an epic fantasy that has dragons in it just now. Though I'm currently at the 30K mark, which means I despise it with the fire of 1,000 suns. But I just got to push through. But it has like a lot of the things that are really close to my heart, and it's sort of like my love letter to a lot of the things I read growing up, like the Dragon Riders of Pern and Robin Hobb, and it's kind of like a dark, sexy Seraphina. So if I can pull it off, I think it'll be really good. But I'm at that stage now where I'm like, I don't know if I can pull it off. And then I'm also working on a book that is not remotely science fiction or fantasy, which is really scary. And it's like a quasi memoir, but not based on my family history, because like a lot of people write about their family history, but mine is like really, really strange. So it's been a challenge and really like quite traumatic in some parts to write, but it's something I've really been wanting to write for a while. So I'm glad that I'm pushing through and trying it out, but I have no idea what'll happen with it. I don't even know if I want to get it published, to be honest, but we'll find out later.
Which is always fun, at least like in the terms of like getting to write something where you're just like, no, I don't have a deadline. I don't have a sale for this. I'm just going to.
Yeah, it's like the thing I let percolate in the background between like when you have the little random gaps as you wait for edits or wait for whatever.
Yeah.
I'm procrastinating on Dragon Book.
That's always good too. Yeah, I am working on a new project. I realize, I guess I can talk about because we haven't really sold it. We haven't shopped it out yet, but it's it involves corporate wars and salt and fashion as politics.
Cool.
And I was talking about it on Twitter today, like all the best tropes of like spear fighting and enemies to, or friends to enemies, friends to lovers to enemies. It's like, which direction
Nice.
does that go? It's a little messy and then they're in the middle of it. So I'm hoping that I can like pull that together and we can find somebody who wants to buy it. And it's nice to be able to write something that is like new and not under any obligations.
Yeah.
So
yeah. So it's really good to like have contracts for things, but it's also quite stressful sometimes to write under deadlines. So I think if you can have a balance of some stuff not written under crazy deadlines, that can be nice.
Yeah. So well, I guess we'll close this out with like, what is something that you've read, watched, listened to lately that you really loved?
Well, there was this book called Behind the Throne. I guess that was all right. I read that. I'm almost done, actually. I'm still like 70% into it, I think. And then I'm also. I didn't spoil you. I know. And then I'm also reading Nevernight by Jay Kristoff, which has like such annoyingly good prose. It almost makes me angry. Like it's so good. And I'm enjoying that. It's very like dark and angry. And then I always listen to or read too many things at once. And I'm very slowly rereading Assassin's Apprentice because it's like my comfort book because Robin Hobb is my favorite author.
Aw,
Love
that's
her.
awesome. So good. I have been. I finally watched. I'm always late to the parties of like exciting stuff or all the pop culture that people love, and then like a year later, I'm like, oh, I guess I'll watch this.
Yeah, I'm always late to the party.
So I finally finished the Untamed, which is that Chinese drama, like fantasy drama, and it was so good. And I immediately started watching it again, in part for the weirdest reason, because I wanted to figure out why. Like why that Elle and I were talking right before we started about The Witcher, which
I'm finally watching.
yeah, and I attempted to watch and couldn't get past the first 2 episodes because I just didn't connect to any of the characters enough to care one way or the other what was going to happen. So I am endlessly interested in like why certain things resonate and why other things don't, especially things that are so popular with so many people. And then I am just kind of like, meh, all right, fine, like it's good. I also watched Space Sweepers.
I loved Space Sweepers so much. It's so good.
So good.
So cute. If you haven't watched it, go watch it on Netflix. It's so good.
Absolutely adorable. And I'm really loving non-Western takes on.
I loved all of the languages in it. It was incredible. I'd never like watched a film that had like 10 plus languages in it. It was fantastic.
Yeah. It was so good. So I was
They basically just like cast people and let them speak their native language. So you had Korean, you had English, you had French, you had like I think it was Nigerian, like a Nigerian dialect, I think.
It was
and a few other things. It was really, really neat.
Yeah, the lady in The Lost and Found was speaking German, which made me giggle quite a bit.
It was really cool.
Yeah, it was very well done. So, hey. So Elle, why don't you tell people where they can find you online?
Oh yeah, so LR_LAM is me on Twitter and Instagram, which are probably my 2 main procrastination tools. I also have a Patreon, and I started a YouTube channel where me and Sinead said Algae Expert talk about climate change, and we're doing different episodes where we focus on a particular aspect of science. So I might pop the link down in the chat. And what about you? Where can you do that?
Folks can find me on Twitter at KB Wagers. And then I am on Instagram at Midway Brawler, which is my Jaeger name, in case you're wondering why it's so weird. And I just haven't. There is a KB Wagers on Instagram. It is also me, but I don't post over there. Come to Midway Brawler, which is where all the cats and the plant photos are. Nice. And I also have a Patreon, which I occasionally post a link to, but you can always find me over there. So, yeah.
Definitely pick up KB's. You got like many books to choose from. So.
Yeah. The new one comes out next Tuesday, so you got time to catch up. And you won't have to deal with all the cliffhangers that everybody else screamed about. So.
And then, of course, I'd love it if you haven't picked up Goldilocks or Seven Devils to maybe give them a look. Because launching in lockdown kind of sucks, but got to do what you got to do. Thank you very much for tuning in. I know it's 1.5 million Zooms in our new reality, but yeah, thank you very much for coming.
Yeah, we appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.